mounted troops. Let's start with mounted. I'm going to do a general overview of these, so very much for newer players. You want to start that off, AB? Talking about mounted?
So there are four types of troops in the game. There's mounted, or cavs. There's ranged, archers. There's ground, and there's siege. And it's important to remember first, visually, how the troops are arranged in the battlefield. So when the battlefield starts, you have all ground at the front, followed by the cavs, followed by the archers, followed by the siege at the back of the battlefield. Cavs are fast. That's their inherent advantage. They're faster than the other troops. They will rush forward in the battlefield, and that's a plus and a minus. It's a plus insofar as they get to your opponent's ground first. It's a minus insofar as they reach the area of attack for your opposing archers, which will target your cavs and likely kill them. The biggest advantage with cavs in the game is using them for boss hunting. That's certainly the temptation when you first start, is you see all of these monsters scattered across the map. You want to hit them all. You want to have more and more and more so you can hit bigger and bigger and bigger. That's great insofar as you're trying to get resources, run rallies, et cetera, et cetera. The downside, however, is the more cavs you have, the weaker you are potentially on defense. Cavs are very vulnerable. Remember, as I said, Cavs' inherent advantage is they move very quickly to the front of the battlefield. Their disadvantage is they're typically beat by archers, and they are very fragile, especially on defense. So Cavs are effective against ground, on the other hand. That's the thing that they typically will beat. So if you have an opponent with really thick ground layers, or you have an opponent who's occupied a building with a ground march, then you would want to send cavs or send a cav rally because those would reach the ground first. They have an inherent advantage over ground. They would clear the ground. If you're running defense, on the other hand, and you have millions and millions and millions of cavs, um, then your opponent is likely going to send archers because remember, your cavs are going to rush forward. They're going to reach the area of attack for those opposing archers. Those archers will kill your cavs. So they're handy for boss hunting. They're handy for countering ground. And once their buffs reach a high enough stage, they're really, really handy in a cav rally for clearing opponents. But their disadvantages, the more you have, the more vulnerable you are on defense.
And you also have the
Okay, anything?
obvious things like the T1 trap, building up a massive amount of T1s through 3s that will help just slow down any hit. You gotta have the right refines for that though. And we're gonna make a later video on that with our member, our T1 defense expert Ein.
I'll build a lot if you don't have the buffs.
Don't build a
Yeah,
lot if you don't have the buffs.
that's right.
Next is Siege, the second weakest, I'd say. Maybe even the
Oh, I think
first.
I'd go a step further and say it's the first weakest. So remember, as I said a second ago, you've got the order in the battlefield. You have your ground at the very front. You've got the cavs behind the ground. You have the archers. You have the siege at the very back of the battlefield. Siege's inherent advantage is it has a very wide area of attack. It's very slow. Its inherent uh, attack and defense and HP are generally lower than your other troops, but it has a very, very, very wide range of attack. And important here is battlefield mechanics. Troops don't start attacking until an opposing troop reaches that area of attack. So if you would imagine it, you've got your siege on the back of the battlefield, your opponent's siege on the back of the battlefield. They're moving forward very slowly, much slower than the rest of the troops on the battlefield. But there comes a point when your siege's area of attack will encompass the opposing siege's area of attack. The opposing siege's area of attack will encompass your siege. Then they start firing. That's why you sometimes hear siege targets siege. That's because their areas of attack overlap fastest. The problem with siege is, with any type of troop, anytime you have one type of troop against the same type of troop, you have no inherent advantage. Remember, with cavs, they have an advantage over ground. With siege versus siege, you're not getting that extra oomph. It's just going to be siege versus siege, which means it's going to come down to your buffs and debuffs. So if you out buff opposing siege, typically you'll win. But if your opponent out buffs your siege, they'll win. That is why siege is very, very, very dangerous to have in bulk. Siege is important to have as a layer when you're developing your defense, but no more than 50,000, 100,000, maybe 500,000. It's important to keep those layers very thin because siege is so fragile. Sieges, you'll sometimes see in PvP, people will do so-called small siege rallies, which are typically rallies filled with your ordinary layers, but then sort of jam-packed with T11 siege. Siege is complicated too. That's the other difficulty with siege. What siege targets gets a little tricky. T11 siege tends to go up and then down, but it also is targeting some T4 siege, strangely enough.
Usually it's T4 siege first and then goes to T14 or whatever the highest tier is.
Right. And so that's another complexity with siege, is exactly what it's targeting in what order, which makes siege additionally complicated. The best advice I can give to anyone getting started in this game is do not go berserk with your siege. It's super vulnerable. You're not going to be doing a bunch of siege rallies at first. As you progress in the game and you start maybe doing siege rallies, maybe T11 rallies, perhaps bulk up that layer of T11 just to have a little extra troops that you can use in the battlefield or in SBS, but also be prepared to ghost that march. Because if you get an opposing opponent, right, remember, buff versus buff if it's siege versus siege. If you're K37 and you've got a bunch of siege and you're facing a K42 or up that hits you with siege solo, they are very likely going to go positive on that because their buffs are naturally going to be higher than yours at K37. So the advantage of siege is it attacks from a distance. So it might attack some archers that are coming in, right? If the opposing siege is gone, then it will start attacking archers. So maybe siege helps a little bit against an archer attack. Maybe it helps a little bit as you progress in the game with targeting opponent siege to soften up a target. But there are enormous weaknesses with siege. It will oftentimes be a points bonanza for an opponent because it is so fragile. And unless the buffs are strong enough, they're just not going to be able to withstand it.
Agreed.
Anything
It's
else?
all a buff game on that.
You got to make sure that keep your siege low. Make sure that you also keep in mind you're not. It's also an expensive troop type to have too. You're not. Once you build it with resources to get it back, you're gonna have to pay with gems. So you're gonna have a lot of siege and keep. When that gets wiped out, you're gonna be paying a little hefty penny when it comes to the gems.
Yeah.
Great point.
And we're not against siege. Just to be clear, you got to make sure that you're set up appropriately with siege when it comes down to it.
Mhm.
You also want to make sure that your siege stays in line with your calves. Making sure that because those two tiers will protect each other.
Great.
But again, if your buffs are not present, then it's just going to get wiped. And then once your siege is wiped, you're going to start having your range get wiped.
Ground troops. Until your buffs are high enough, they're kinda shit. They're really good for
That's a nice one.
defending, but it's true. They're good for defending. They're not so good for attacking unless you're gonna clear.
So for all of these troops, what I would encourage anyone getting started on this game to do is, in the game, you can go to each of the various troop buildings, the barracks, archer camp, stables, workshop, etc., and click on one of them. So if you click on barracks and you click train, for each troop tier, 1, 2, 3, etc., if you click on that troop, it will show you its base stats. And I think this is important to wrap your mind around as you're getting started with the game, to understand each troop's strengths and each troop's weaknesses. So for, let's say, T13 ground, for example, their highest stat is typically going to be their HP, usually followed by their defense, and in third place, their attack. They also have a very narrow range of attack and a pretty slow speed. So what does this mean? This means that ground troops are very meaty. They're hardy, sturdy troops. Their advantage is they can take a lot of hits, but they're not attacking as effectively or lethally as maybe your archers or maybe your calves. Ground troops sit at the front of the battlefield, and they're moving very, very slowly, and they have a very narrow range of attack. And that makes sense. They're ground troops. They're using their fists. They're using, they're tactile. They're not shooting from afar like archers or siege.
They're
They're not
walking.
racing forward. They're walking. They're sauntering across the battlefield, okay? Ground beats archers, generally, unless the archer buffs are extraordinary. So if you see a building, for example, occupied by an archer march, you would send the counter march, which is ground. In defense, your ground works the same way. It defends against incoming archers. I personally tend to build a defense around ground, at least in the start, because your most likely hit is going to be an archer march from an opponent if it's a solo. And so you want to have sufficient ground troops to counter that incoming attack. Ground is a pretty versatile troop type because it is at the front of the battlefield. It's going to collide with opponent ground, but it's also going to collide with opponent calves. And calves generally beat ground, but if your buffs are sufficient, they'll beat the calves too. Ground is also handy for reinforcing your teammates. That's generally the type of march we at top use to reinforce one another. Ordinarily, the order of attack is going to be siege, then archer, then cav, then ground. Well, if you're reinforcing a teammate with ground, for example, and you know the likely incoming attack from an opponent is going to be first archers, that will counteract that incoming attack. The disadvantage with ground is its attack is really low. And so it's a little harder unless if your opponent has only, for example, archers and siege and maybe a little bit of T1 left, you can send ground to clear out the remnants. It will appropriately trump the archers. Ground can beat siege if there's a clear path to it. So it's a good last hit as you're getting started to clear out those remaining troops and keep.
No, I mean, when you're first starting out, you got to also be careful too, because ground tends to eat up a lot of your resources, especially if you build multiple, like we're talking millions and millions of troops.
Yeah.
They're usually the first ones to start chomping down on all your food resources, so you got to be careful with that.
Great point.
But yeah, biggest thing is just remembering they call it the battle triangle. Is your ground will always take care of your archers will always take care of the calves, and the calves will always take out your ground. and Siege just sits back and does nothing. It goes against Siege.
Siege
It's the
explodes.
biggest
It's
thing.
very good at that.
It's very good at exploding, yes. I've seen it happen plenty of times. I will be the first to tell you I was a culprit of having high Siege starting on this game, and I got so fed up with it, I dismissed everything up to about 500k layers, and now I'm seeing reports that somebody will try to siege me, and it will just splat every time. So it's the best thing I could tell you for that.
Alright, moving into ranged. Ranged is one of the best troop types, I think we can all agree. It's going to get hit last in the attacking order, generally. It's usually one of the last troops left alive in your keep.
So, again, remember order of battlefield, ground, then calves, then archers, then siege. So archers, sometimes called ranged troops, are called that because they hit from a distance. Their area of attack is wide. It's not as wide as siege, but it's quite a bit wider than calves and ground. That means that they can attack opponent troops from afar. So, for example, let's say you're sending your archers forward. Your opponent has calves coming forward. As the opponent calves are rushing toward those archers, they enter the area of attack. Your archers are activated. They attack the calves. Generally speaking, archers beat calves. The calves are hit before they can reach the archers. That is their advantage. The other big advantage with archers is there are lots and lots and lots of buffs available for archer attack. Maybe more for archer attack than any other troop type in the game. Um, so a lot of players, that's the march they'll start with, is their archer march. It's very versatile. It can be used for quick hits, especially once you're getting started in SVS or Battlefield, whatever the scenario may be. The disadvantage with archers on defense is the flip side of its advantage. Archers often, you'll see defense reports where you get attacked, and maybe you even get attacked with archers. And you'll see that your archers did absolutely nothing. They sat at the back of the battlefield and twiddled their thumbs, apparently. They will have killed nothing. Meanwhile, your cabs in keep got killed by incoming archers. The reason that is happening is because, remember the area of attack. Your calves are rushing forward. The opponent archers are hitting those calves, and they're then moving forward as they're hitting. Your ground is pressing forward. Maybe you've got a little bit of siege that's wiped out in the enemy siege, and then it's starting to work on the archers because there's nothing left on the siege level. But typically, what you'll see in your reports is either your ground killing the opponent archers or your T1 wall killing the opponent archers. And we'll talk about that in another video. But you might get frustrated at first thinking, well, what is the point of this? Why do I need all these archers? They're not going to do anything on defense. Well, what most players will do is if you've got a good defense, they'll either solo or rally you with a two-shot. Archers first to clear your calves, or at least weaken your calves substantially, followed by a cav march or cav rally. That's when your archers activate. Because as those incoming calves approach you, your archers now have something to hit. So, all that to say, if you are getting hit with archers and you look at your reports and you see your archers not doing a lot, that doesn't mean that they're useless. It just means that they have nothing to target with that first opening march. Now, sometimes archers will attack archers because their range of attack will overlap, or like siege, and so you will see them activate a little bit, especially if it's maybe an archer rally. But generally speaking, with a solo, you're not going to see your archers doing very much. Archers are good for reinforcing sometimes. If your teammate is getting hit with calves, certainly archers can be used as a reinforcement to counteract those calves. Archers are also handy because if your teammate, for example, has a T1 wall, and it's a good T1 wall, and the opponent has sent archers or maybe even calves, and it gets caught up at that T1 wall and it can't get past it, your reinforcing archers are then going to start moving forward until they do have something to hit, and then they might start hitting those opposing archers. Meanwhile, those opposing archers are still stuck on the T1 wall. Your archers are hitting, not taking any damage. So archers can be used for reinforcing as well.
If your buffs are substantial enough, you can use more than just mounted to hit bosses. You can
Okay.
rally it with T14 archers, like I do. While your mounted's still going to do the best against it, everything else can. And that's just an extra way to not bloat your mounted while still hitting more bosses.
Yeah, just make sure you have the buffs there
Yeah.
because that could be very costly.
I cost AB a lot of speed ups by telling people to hit him, so I'm hitting above my weight on some bosses right now.
um, well, and that's a really good point though, Jay. I mean, not everyone on a team needs to be a boss rallier. Okay, when you're first getting started in the game, there's this temptation to just go wild with calves. There, if you're hitting monsters on the map, there are three ways to hit bigger and bigger monsters. You can increase your buffs, you can increase your monster defense debuffs, or you can increase your troops you're sending, which would increase the power of the initial attack. It's that third option that is the temptation for many new players. What's the downside? I'll just make more calves. I'll hit bigger and bigger bosses. I'll get more and more resources. Well, like we talked about earlier, what happens then is you've exposed yourself on defense. You have a bloated top tier cav layer that's going to explode when the opponent sends archers. So don't feel like you have to be the ultimate boss rallier. Um, there'll be folks on your team who will be interested in doing that. Maybe a little bit more experienced players who know how to are more efficient with ghosting or are building a different type of defense or whatever. But it's okay not to be the biggest boss rallier on your team. I guess that would be my biggest 2 cents to add. Let's do traps really quickly.
So traps.
Traps are trash.
They're kind of not worth it. I mean, you build 5k of them, half that's going to die, and the rest is just going to sit in your keep for eternity.
I guess technically, yeah. I mean, I guess technically there's a fifth quote troop type, and it's traps. Um, certain traps will counter certain troops. Certain traps are made to counter archers, ground, whatever. As part of your daily routine, you're supposed to make 150 traps. I do that every day. I don't pay attention to what they even are. I just do it to check that box. Traps are complicated. There's a lot of variables that go into it. They're not worth it. I mean, in theory, they add an extra layer to your defense, but the benefit is so marginal, it's not worth it. And if they die in battlefield, you don't get them back at the end. You're much better off taking the resources that you would use to build those traps and putting them toward the appropriate troops.
You want to share how the trap triggering thing works, AB?
Yeah, so there's a complicated formula for trap triggering. I don't really even understand it, but if you search online, you can probably find it. But it just goes to show you that it's a little unpredictable. You have to have a minimum of 500 of a certain type of trap for it to trigger in the first place. Only one type of trap will actually activate. And in that regard, it does technically add a layer. And there's some advantage to that, but it's just such a marginal benefit. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth putting a lot of effort and resources into traps.
No, you just need to make the
Yeah,
base layer of it.
I'm looking at it right now, and just like a level 7 fire arrow, it gives you some type of range. Like, and when I say range, I don't mean like truly, range troops. I mean, it gives you attacking range. It's 1500, so that's really low. And then it gives you 20,000 attack, but it doesn't. Like you said, you have to reach that activation to get it. So it really isn't worth it. Honestly, to tell you the truth, and this is for the people that are in SVS, if you have a keep that has no troops in it and you want to piss off whoever you're playing against, just build traps. Because they'll hit your keep and you'll score points on them just based off of the traps alone. That's really what I've seen it's always good for.
True.